We will give folks a moment to join and then we will begin. Looks like we still have folks filtering in. All right, and welcome to ARMA International's webinar, Information Governance, Business Alignment is a Must. I'm Nick Inglis. I'm the Executive Director of Content and Programming at ARMA International, and I'll be both your host and a participant in today's webinar. For those of you who have attained your IGP, the Information Governance Professional Certification, today's webinar counts towards one continuing education credit in the Information Management category. If you have a question, feel free to ask in the Q&A box at any point throughout the webinar. We are unlikely to get to all questions, but we will respond to any questions that we've received after the webinar has concluded if we aren't able to answer them live. Before we get started, I want you to consider doing something great for yourself, all while helping support ARMA this year. ARMA professional members continue to say over and over again that they're wildly satisfied with what they're receiving as a professional member. Over 95% of our members say that they would recommend ARMA membership to colleagues. I don't know of any other association that comes even close on that metric. ARMA is on the rise, and we need you to help us get the message out. The people who are managing information in their organizations, only a small percentage are actual ARMA members. That needs to change, and we need your help getting the word out. Remember that feeling that you had when you first discovered ARMA International and all of the resources that you gained access to? I want you to take a moment this week and share that feeling. Get other people on the path towards success and encourage your company or organization to make everyone who's managing information a member of ARMA International. We even offer group discounts to make it easier for you to connect your company or organization with ARMA. Share the feeling of knowing that you're not alone in this. Share ARMA professional membership. The ARMA Conference 2019, it is coming up this month in just a couple weeks. We're calling it the ARMA InfoCon in recognition of the merger between ARMA and Information Coalition's Information Governance Conference. This year is going to be just ridiculous. With amazing keynote sessions and over 140 education sessions. There are educational workshops, a leadership summit, and if you haven't registered yet, what are you waiting for? Do it. It's going to be in Nashville. It's going to be amazing, and you need to be there. ARM is on the rise, and our conference this year is going to be a wealth of learning, networking, and you don't have to share this part with your boss, but it's going to be a ton of fun as well. You can register now at arma.org/infocon. We are joined today by Ann Snyder, the Manager of Content Development here with me at ARMA, and BJ Johnson, Director of Digital Solutions and Strategic Partners at Access. ARMA is incredibly thankful for the financial support that makes programming like this possible. When choosing business partners and solutions for your information programs, I hope you'll give extra consideration to the solution providers who continue to invest in you and your professional development. Solution providers like the great folks at Access. Ann, I will transition over to you.
Thanks for that introduction, Nick. Welcome, everyone. This is the third in a series of webinars that we've done with Access. The first was on reviving document management. The second one was on capture, and we're really excited today to be joined by BJ Johnson to talk about aligning IG with the business. Now, BJ's a man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Many of you already know BJ. He's an ARMA New Jersey board member. He has over 17 years of information management experience, including areas in record center operations, scanning, account management, and customer care. In his current role at Access, he, and this is how he describes his role, empowers organizations to improve business processes, compliance, and security. And his focus is on employee information management. The case study he's going to share with us today is about how to align IG with the business, specifically in the area of HR and handling those employee documents. We're looking forward to tapping into BJ's expertise today. Welcome, BJ.
Thank you, Ann and Nick. Really looking forward to today's webinar, and thanks for having me.
Thanks. You switch to the next slide, Nick, the agenda. So today we are going to discuss aligning information governance with the business. We'll talk about what we mean by that, why it's a challenge, and then of course why it's so important, why we have to do this. We'll talk about how leveraging technology ecosystems plays into this. We'll look at some of the must-haves that you should consider when you're selecting technology to be part of that ecosystem. Now that's not going to be an exhaustive list, of course, and keep an eye out for a white paper that's going to follow this webinar, which will go into some more detail. We'll talk a little bit too about the role that automation plays in aligning IG with the business and how it can actually help reduce risk and improve efficiency as well. Then I'm going to hand it off to BJ, who's going to talk to us about the work that Access does and talk about a case study where we can see some of these ideas in action in the real world. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A. Again, if we don't get to all of those questions, you can email us offline. We'll try to respond to those offline. And look as well for a poll question that's going to pop up during this webinar as well. So please participate in that with an infographic on that to follow. So since we're talking about aligning information governance with the business processes, let's take a look at how we're defining IG. This is ARMA's definition from the ARMA Guide to the Information Profession. I'm going to zip through it pretty quickly, emphasizing a couple points, but refer back to it just for more detail. So information governance is the overarching and coordinating strategy for all of an organization's information. It establishes the authorities, supports, processes, capabilities, structures, and infrastructure that enable information to be both a useful asset and a reduced liability to that organization. And that's based on the organization's specific business requirements and risk tolerance. Now, I'd like to emphasize just a few points here in this definition that relate specifically to our discussion today, and we'll try to tie these back throughout the discussion. First of all, is IG applies to all organization information, whether that's electronic or paper. And I just want to take a moment to emphasize this. Unless you're an outlier, you have paper. I know BJ is going to talk about this a bit and what he actually encounters in the real world when working with clients. But business processes today still very often include paper. And if you want to align IG with the business, you need to take that into account. IG also applies to all information regardless of the system. So as we talk about technology ecosystems, we have these very, very complex information environments with dozens, if not hundreds of business-specific applications, many of which are not designed with IG in mind. And so we have to take those systems into account too, regardless of where that information lies. And finally, IG's goal of making information a useful asset and reduced liability. So it's, I think, important to think of information as always having this risk and value side. I think sometimes we get a little myopically focused on risk reduction as opposed to thinking about IG as also facilitating the value side of information. Nick, can we switch to the next slide? So this is just like, we'll take a quick look at this. This infographic is ARMA's representation of the information lifecycle. There are different representations out there, but this is the one we're using. Just keep in mind that governing both the risk and value sides of information has to be done throughout the entire information lifecycle. From the moment that information is created, when it enters your organization on the far left there at creation and capture, until it leaves your organization through defensible disposition or archiving, depending on the nature of the documents. If you look at each of these bubbles, or just think of how information flows through your organization, it's pretty clear that an organization's interests, its uses, including its value and risk of that information, change substantially over the entire information's life cycle. Go to the next slide. So aligning IG with the business. What exactly do we mean when we're saying this? In the ads for this webinar, we asked the question, what if IG could be embedded into the business process? What if it just happened? Now we've just looked at a very complicated definition of IG. Certainly all of those things are not going to just happen. That's certainly a stretch. But there is a lot that we can do by aligning with the business and their processes that can start to make it feel almost seamless. And that's what we're talking about. That's the goal of aligning IG with the business. So what are some of the challenges that we face? Well, there are a number of them. These are just a few. various stakeholders in information have different perspectives on the use of information. What do I mean by that? A business user, for example, is thinking of his day-to-day work, the use of information in those processes. He might be thinking about access and sharing information. It isn't necessarily focused on the legal and regulatory compliance things that some of us think about on a regular basis. And even if that person is aware of those concerns, as is often the case in HR, people know that they're handling sensitive information. It's not always their day-to-day focus. And they might not have the bandwidth or even the resources to prioritize those concerns along with their day-to-day work. The second point there is that the actual stakeholders, as well as the value and risk of information, can change over time. Nick, do you mind going back to the slide just before? So we go to this information lifecycle slide. Imagine at the far left of this diagram, we have a manager or recruiter working on filling a role. They're likely not thinking about retention or disposition over to the right a little bit there that's associated with the records that they're creating or about to create. They're not thinking of e-discovery, and they're certainly not thinking of something like an unemployment claim filed 6 years for a person that they haven't even hired yet. So just again, this idea that information stakeholders change over time and the value changes over time too. If we can go back to the other slide, Nick, thanks. The final point is, and challenge that people face is that IG can often feel like a burden. And, it makes me think of Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a hill. It rolls back down and he pushes it back up. And IG is like this in one sense in that it's never over. You're constantly doing it with your information. And I think sometimes this is the way IG feels to our business partners. We're asking them to do something that doesn't feel or maybe isn't immediately relevant to the work they're doing. And it's hard, it's time consuming, and it may feel like a burden. And they're thinking, why am I pushing this boulder up a hill when I have work to do that's over here? It's not this boulder pushing. Now, just as a quick caveat, I want to be 100% clear that I don't think of IG as a Sisyphean task. This isn't a punishment. There's really important value that we can get out of IG. But when it comes to aligning with the business, the idea is that we can reduce some of the burden that people are experiencing. So we automate where we can, and we can do a lot through methodology to reduce that burden and make it feel almost seamless from the end user's perspective. BJ, do you have any comments on that? Is that consistent with what you're seeing with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely, Ann. I mean, we're going to be talking about HR today, and if you think about, an HR group in a large organization, right? You might have teams focused on recruiting, and I mean, let's face it, in today's job market, where skilled employees are really tight, they are focused on getting the best talent into their organization as quickly as possible, and they don't often think about some of the compliance things that go along with the work that they're doing. And it's, again, it's not really a, I don't care. Their focus is in another area, and really a lot of times it falls down to education, right? They just need to understand that there's more to their job than that, that urgent task that they're dealing with. And, young folks need to, especially that are, as millennials need to come in, they need to realize that a record is an important thing, and it's not a shiny black plastic thing that you used to put on a turntable.
What about just, so I mean, obviously I'm a believer that the information is important and we have to consider these things, but what about just even a resourcing issue? We're so, everyone's running on leaner models today, partly because of the talent demands that are out there. What are we seeing in terms of people actually having time to do this? So if your day-to-day job is X and there's, yes, a very, very important process that has to be done, what about just time management? If you're being sort of scored, evaluated on your day-to-day work, it's how do you get people to consider those things that, yes, are important long-term for the information, but don't seem to be the immediate task of the day.
Yeah, so and we'll get into that a little bit later on, but it goes back to what you said earlier. It's starting to look for and understand the different ways that you can do the job that is your priority, while still doing the right things by your
Mm-hmm.
organization when it comes to compliance and security.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the two things absolutely can go hand in hand. But you know, you have to lean on processes and technology to sort of make that happen.
Right, and the more, and I think that's the very topic of this webinar today, is the more we can reduce that friction that people experience, make it easier, faster, automate where we can behind the scenes. It takes some of that burden. It allows people to do that work that's important without having those pain points.
Absolutely.
Can we go to the next slide? So aligning IG with the business. So what are the benefits? Well, an obvious one, and BJ and I were already talking about this, is sort of increased efficiency. So if we actually take the time to look at the business process, understand what those pain points are for our business users of information, we can do a lot to reduce the burden of IG on them. Again, automation is one thing we'll be talking about. So you end up with you know, an immediate benefit to the business stakeholders in terms of efficiency, taking some of these administrative tasks or things that feel like that but are incredibly important to the business off their plates so that they can focus on that immediate work. And you're also making it easier for them to do the right thing. But also we see improvements in efficiency in the future too. And this is you know, what I was talking about with that timeline, and I think it's really important. Your business value doesn't stop in the first couple months of the use of the information. Other people are using that information for their jobs as well. Even if they're compliance or risk jobs, it's their day-to-day work. And if we get information properly classified today and where it needs to go for future use, there are added efficiencies for those future stakeholders as well, which are incredibly important to consider. Those people aren't then running around searching for something or trying to even figure out what it is if we take those steps early on. So those long-term improvements in efficiency have to be considered as well. The other thing is better results. And I think that we'll talk about this under automation. I think this will probably come up in BJ's case study too. When we remove some of these manual steps, first, manual steps lead to inaccuracies. People aren't malicious, but again, they're busy. Human error happens. If we automate some of these steps, grab data from other systems and use it to populate others rather than having manual re-entry of information, we get better results. And along with that, better legal and regulatory compliance. BJ, do you have any thoughts on that before we go to the next slide?
No, I think the one thing that as you were speaking, it made me think about another webinar I did recently where when we were polling the audience, in that webinar, we're sort of focusing on system integrations.
Mm-hmm.
One of the poll questions was, you know, around inefficiencies, and we had thrown sort of a softball in there. We didn't think many people would click on it as
Mm-hmm.
a response, but it was just inefficiencies around entering the same data in multiple applications.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, of the examples of inefficiencies, we were actually surprised that was number 2 on the list.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, I can say that in my when I was in a business user role or playing more of that role, that was certainly a common issue that we faced. So, and it's just you know, sometimes those also what you're entering isn't as easy, and the consistencies from one system you're entering into another is also a hiccup that can be entered in the system.
Absolutely.
So can you go to the next slide, Nick? So leveraging technology ecosystems. So we don't want to dive into this debate too much, but there's an ongoing myth of, you know, one solution to rule them all is if you can have one information system that will take care of all your information woes. To the extent that people actually believe that, it's not generally what we've actually seen happening in work with clients. That's not my personal experience for sure, and I'll let BJ comment on that too. But even also within a given functional area like HR, we're not always seeing this one solution, single HRIS system or HCM approach. You know, that might work, and again, this is going to come up in BJ's examples and his case study. That may work for a smaller company, but in reality, what we're seeing at larger companies is that they're using multiple tools, and there's a proliferation of very specialized business tools, business applications, even within specific specialized areas like HR, leading to multiple streams of information. And we have things like LMS systems, applicant tracking, onboarding tools, case management tools, just to name a few. And then over an entire ecosystem, when you go outside of a specific functional area, in a big organization, you may even have 100 or more very specialized business applications. BJ, do you have any comments on that? I know you recently were looking at some statistics on that.
Yeah. So when last week, I was out at the HR technology conference. So I've got tech overload right now. But we were talking to some folks from Gartner, and I was actually shocked at the small number of medium to large organizations that have actually invested in a cloud HCM suite. Obviously, that's where a lot of people are going, especially larger organizations. But it was a pretty small percentage. I think it was around 30%, if I remember correctly. I think I got it in one of the slides later on. But it was a small percentage. But even as people move to those cloud suites, they're still not finding everything that they need within those suites. So and I think even if we look outside of HR, right, we see software companies like Oracle and SAP, and there's some great technology that we like, and then all of a sudden Oracle or SAP comes along and gobbles it up, and they buy it, and they kind of bolt it into their ecosystem, and then all of a sudden it's a solution people don't like anymore, and they go off to the next best thing. So it's almost like there's an evolution across business systems, right? We all have our ERPs and our HCMs, but it's just like we never quite get there with that, with that one monolith that does everything.
And what were you, when you were having this discussion with them, it was that they didn't have any ECM, or that they just weren't moving to another new ECM? I don't know if they probed that question at all, or if you have any sense of that.
Yeah, so Gartner was coming at it from a standpoint of the human capital management cloud suites. But we did get into that discussion, as it relates to ECM and document management and content management tools. And same thing there, HR has some unique use cases, because certainly in a lot of our large clients, they have an ECM, yet they're still, deploying our solution to fill a gap, right?
Or ECMs, plural.
Exactly. Well, if you think about mergers and acquisition, and we've got, one that's, I want to say they have about 2,000 locations, and a lot of that's through acquisitions. But they probably have 4 ECMs right now, and maybe 3 HRISs. They plan to whittle that down, but that doesn't happen overnight.
I've certainly seen not just the mergers and acquisitions issue, but the sort of starts and stops. So someone is deploying the system in one location or one functional area to solve a problem, and someone else is doing something similar in another area.
Absolutely.
So, and again, I think that you've alluded to this. It's not necessarily a bad thing to not have this one solution for them all. These specialized business tools, it allows us to make better options, to choose the best in breed options. So we're not limited to just the functionality that exists in that one platform. So you might find something that's, again, these things get compiled in different ways through mergers, through acquiring different technologies, and sometimes you don't always have the best in breed on one aspect in a particular platform. And so I think one of the things that I think is neat about this technology ecosystem approach is that rather than fitting the business need into the technology that you have, shoehorning it in there, you find the technology that best fits the business need. And that I think actually this is another key way in which you align with the business better. You're leveraging the ecosystem then by piecing those together in a way that actually works better for the business. So BJ, do you think, again, is this what you're, again, you said that this is in general what Gartner was finding, but is that what you're seeing when you're out there working with your clients?
We're definitely seeing that. Again, in those larger organizations, that on-premise ECM that's, packed to the gills with information, it's not going anywhere. It's not. But might you be connecting, a retention management tool or some other cloud technology to that ECM solution, to maybe breathe some fresh life into it? Or is that ECM integrating with some employee or client facing tool to provide information that solution needs to that user group?
Or just, I mean, to fill a gap, just, I know we'll talk about it in a bit, just the idea of just cloud technologies. If your ECM is on-prem and it doesn't have those capabilities, you might need to fill that gap depending on your data needs. So, so of course, I mean, we're not saying that there, just to reemphasize this, we're not saying there isn't a role for content management systems, and that's what we're talking about today too, when ECMs and CSPs. Many of these business applications that are very, very specialized and maybe are best in breed for one activity aren't really designed to manage information throughout the rest of its life cycle. Again, referring back to that image that we looked at the beginning, they're not necessarily thinking about retention and disposition capabilities, working with e-discovery needs, legal holds that sort of disrupt that as well. So this idea of pulling documents into a more centralized location where appropriate and managing them in a more centralized way certainly has its role. So let's look at some must-haves to consider when selecting technology. Now, this is certainly by no means a comprehensive list of all the components that we're going to look for as you attempt to leverage your technology ecosystem. And BJ is going to highlight a few more in his discussion. And also, again, I ask people to keep an eye out for the white paper that's going to be coming up. But the first one of these is integration. So this should be pretty obvious. If you want to leverage this diverse technology ecosystem, this technology stack of business-specific applications, you need integration between those. You can have the best tools, the best in breed, but if those tools aren't connected, you're hopping from one tool to another to get the job done. You're not getting the documents into the systems in which they need to be located for the next phases of the information lifecycle. And you may, in fact, with this diverse environment, without those connectivities, those integrations, you may negate some of the advantages that you're getting by selecting that best in breed. So integrations are essential components in that technology stack. You need effective APIs. BJ, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're starting to see with technology in general is that word integration or API, regardless of the system, that's really starting to become very important to buyers. And in some cases, they may not be exactly thinking how they're going to utilize that integration or API, but they don't want to buy anything anymore unless there is that capability, because they don't know how their business is going to evolve, right? One thing is for certain is that, if you're in a thriving organization, you can count on change being constant. And that's also going to apply to your technology.
Are you finding, so certainly these tools that are meant to pull information from these systems have to be thinking about integrations first and foremost. Are you finding sort of renewed consideration of that in these tools, these business applications that are very specialized? Are they starting to think about that a little bit more too? How do they integrate with these CMs, CSPs, ECMs, and so on?
Yeah, so specifically when we think about modern HR technology, it is very rare, and this is even true for your HCM suites. And we're talking, the popular systems like Workday or Ultimate Software or ADP. All of these solutions just have a full library of APIs. It's interesting that Workday is one of the most popular HCM suites out there, but through APIs and integration, people are actually using other tools and other software through Workday, and they're not even aware, right? So if you think about timekeeping, for instance,
right?
Kronos considers himself an HCM, and they are, but they grew up as the best when it comes to timekeeping. So, if you look at a healthcare organization that's using Workday, while it may not be apparent, the timekeeping aspect of it is probably Kronos.
And that's exactly what we're looking for, though. We're looking for it for them to not even know
exactly
what's happening behind the scenes. And I mean, not that it's a secret, but they shouldn't feel the integration. They should just have the best in breed served up to them where they need it and within the same system. Do you agree with that?
Yes, yeah. One of the big drivers that, I don't want to say a driver. I would say it's just, it's moving from a buzzword to reality. for those of us in the software space, like we're always thinking about the user experience and user interface. But this year at the HR Technology Conference, one of the things that became very apparent is they're starting to talk about what's the employee experience, right? How can an employee, do some self-service things when it comes to HR? Can I get a question answered, easily through a chat bot or something like that? And how does that occur, right? It's connecting through a knowledge base and multiple systems, sort of working together to create a better employee experience, right? Nobody wants their employees leaving anymore. It goes back to that tight labor market again.
And just the that's a sort of we were thinking a lot about just the work aspect, how sometimes these things are disruptive to your doing your work, but just even existing as an employee within a company, if you add those kinds of hiccups, if they're not seamless steps for the end user, that just adds a tremendous amount of inefficiencies in your day as well, just functioning.
Yeah, because nobody wants to spend time if we all or most of us, I'm sure, on the webcast today, we work at an organization and we got hired, we filled out some paperwork, or we completed that paperwork electronically in some sort of onboarding solution. And it was either a good experience or it was a bad experience. If we did it on paper, probably not the greatest experience.
Right.
If we were able to, if we were able to do it,
fax me that.
Yeah.
I'll fax you that back to 2009. Yeah, sure.
If you can successfully sign all of these pieces of paper today, we will hire you. But if you can do that electronically on your smartphone or at your leisure, right? That's a better experience. But now what happens with those documents over the rest of the life cycle? Right.
And it's interesting too. I think we've also gotten to a point where I think we have very little tolerance for those hiccups. I think they become very, very frustrating because we're constantly expecting that information to be at our fingertips immediately, and for those processes to be smooth, because that's the the interaction we have with our consumer applications, for example. So I think we're expecting and now demanding those kinds of things in our workplace too.
We expect there to be an app for everything.
Okay. So the next thing on the bullet point there is full lifecycle management capabilities. So we already touched on this, but many of these business applications really are just not designed with some of that, the long-term lifecycle management issues that we looked at on that lifecycle graphic. So there's certainly not retention and disposition in many of those systems, or e-discovery, for example. And of course, even if they were, with the proliferation of these systems, if you're dealing with upwards of over half a dozen of them, say, in HR, and hundreds of them across an organization, managing these issues system by system is incredibly time consuming. It's impractical. You're going to have errors and so on. And this is where those CMs, CSPs, and ECMs come in. The idea is, and we'll talk about this again when BJ goes through the case example, you flow these documents into these kinds of systems where they can be managed with respect to their records retention and disposition and e-discovery in a central way. And in that process, you're pulling metadata and the documents from these other systems. So BJ, when we were talking about this, you mentioned that you sometimes encounter clients who want to leave documents in those originating systems, or copies of documents, or the documents themselves even. And among the issues that you brought up are that sometimes those systems are organized in a maybe generous suboptimal way, that they're, say, organized transactionally, which maybe makes sense in the business application or by employee, but that this can be a problem long-term for managing that information and governing it long-term. So what is the problem that you're seeing, and how do you convince your clients to take a better approach, and what do you recommend? I know I've hit you there with 3 questions, so.
Yeah, so let's go back to that onboarding example, right? A good onboarding system is a good user and employee experience, right? It's efficient. We can use whatever device we want. And in some cases, it's just data that's the result of that. But in many cases, there's going to be forms, right? And there's going to be documents that are generated. And so, what I talk to clients about is, who have that mindset of, well, we love that onboarding system. And I'm never saying get rid of that onboarding system, but those onboarding documents, especially, if you're a large client, if you're a multinational, those documents are going to be, they might be needed for an audit. And I think we all have a tendency to kind of think about audits as some government agency or whatever coming in to audit us. But frequently, and something we certainly deal with at Access, we're audited by our clients all the time. That's the biggest volume of audits that we deal with. It's audits coming from our clients. And so if I need to produce documents for an audit that are in that onboarding system, like, what does that look like?
Right.
If you think about the onboarding, part of it, there was probably pretty limited access. And so now I have to produce those documents for an audit. What do? I download them. Yeah, that's probably what I do. I download them. I send them off as an email attachment. Well, that's not the smartest thing.
Nope.
And all of that is not only inefficient, but you're creating risk, right? And so you're not helping yourself. And so. No, go ahead, Ann.
No, just the idea of searching it too. So you're looking for a specific document. I think one of the examples we talked about was, say you're doing an I-9 audit, and if it's organized by employee and you're searching employee by employee by employee, as opposed to having those documents organized by file type, that you can search them differently for the different purpose.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. So whether it's I-9 or some other document, a lot of times in human capital management, solutions, they could be just stored at the employee record level. So using your example, I need to find 100 I-9s. Do I really want to go into 100 employee folders? Or 100 transactions, right? Because sometimes it's not even at an employee folder structure; it's a transaction. So not only is it cumbersome to get those documents over to a litigator or a regulator, it's just hard to find it.
It's 100 searches versus a single search for that type of document, which can be, say, date delimited and so on. So.
Yeah, it's using systems for what they were designed for. That's really what I think is at the root of the shift to technology ecosystems. Find the solutions that, like you said earlier, that really fits the business challenge that we're trying to solve. Easy to use, but let's not try to make it do something that it wasn't designed for.
Right, and when that business use and need changes, we have to contemplate how that same information used for one purpose early on might change over time.
Yes.
So the next bullet point we have here is access controls, and I think this one should be a pretty obvious one to people, that it's essential that all parts of your technology ecosystem have access controls around them, so that only the right people are seeing the information that they need. And this is both, external access, the security around the systems, but we're also talking about within your organization. Not everybody should be seeing all of the information in every single system, and I think this is, particularly important in the area that we're talking about here, HR. So we want some of the qualities we want in those kinds of controls, or we'd like to see them role-based. We want to be able to cut someone's access when that person changes roles, and we also want to integrate it within the organization's identity access and management system, so that when a person leaves, we can make sure that that role is cut off as well. BJ, so what kinds of access controls are especially important in the context of managing employee information?
Yeah, so you have to get pretty granular in the HR world, and even folks who are part of HR, we don't see those folks having full access to all the documents associated with an employee file. Your HR business partners or HR generalists, as they're sometimes referred to, a lot of times what we will see is that they are going to give those folks access to a subset of all the documents that may be in an employee folder. And a lot of times, again, if we think about a large organization, they might restrict that based on geography, right? So I'm a HR business partner or generalist responsible for the Northeast, right? And so I will only be able to see those employees in the Northeast, and I will only be able to see specific documents, but then it also gets into things like, I should not be able to see my supervisor's employee file, any of the documents, right? And, of course, the C-level, that's going to be really tightly controlled in terms of who can see those employee folders. So there's just tons of it.
And also just the sort of restrictions with privacy restrictions around seeing only what you need to see to do your job.
Exactly.
And those requirements. So.
And even the third-party access, to auditors. I think we all know that, when you're dealing with an audit, you don't overshare, right? And a lot of that gets back to making sure that you have things, properly classified, and that you can, really drill in and only provide what was required for an audit.
I think sometimes too, when you're scrambling, if you're in the, if you don't consider an audit as part of your sort of routine and you don't prepare for it, you often end up scrambling. Same thing with e-discovery, and that's where those kinds of mistakes get made. You overshare, and you have to claw back or deal with that hiccup some other way. So
sharing is not always caring.
Right. Well, speaking of sharing, that was a good segue. Thank you. So secure sharing. So this is an important capability to look for in your technology stack. And I mean, why? This should be pretty obvious. Sharing information is such an incredibly important part of our day-to-day business, the work that we do. We need to share it with third parties. We need to share it when we're being audited. We need to share it and collaborate on it when we're working with our business, with our colleagues within the organization. And if we're not well aligned in this way with the business, if we don't enable effective sharing, then we end up with some of the problems. I think you mentioned some of these. People, take matters into their own hands because they have to share to get their work done. So they do things like download that information out of a secured system, they email it and maybe don't encrypt it. That not only leads to these kinds of inefficiencies that we've already discussed when we don't align with the business, that sort of any time you have those hiccups between systems, you end up with inefficiencies, but also there are security concerns taking it out of those secure systems, sharing it in a way that you shouldn't. And then you're creating duplicates, replicating this information. Someone downloads it to a laptop, someone shares it, and now this single copy that you are now expected at some future date to apply a consistent retention and disposition schedule to is all over the organization. So what are we looking for, BJ, when you're considering secure sharing capabilities? What are some of the things that we would look for in those technology stacks?
Well, you certainly want to do things like let's face it, we're going to use email for as a mechanism for sharing, but you're not sharing an attachment, you're sharing a link back to the application, right, where the information is housed. And so you need to think about authenticating that user, right? Email's not enough. So just something as simple as two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. And if we're sharing a link, that link shouldn't be active forever, and I shouldn't be able to share that link with another person. When we think about a lot of companies that we deal with have outside legal counsel, and so outside legal counsel, they probably have their own e-discovery tools, and so there needs to be a mechanism where if there's litigation going on, that you can, in our solution, that we have secure file rooms where you can place thousands of documents in there, and grant those attorneys the type of access that they need, because frequently they're gonna want to download them and bring them into an e-discovery solution. So you got to share, but you got to share securely, and there should be an audit history on all of that, right? If you shared with somebody, you should be able to see what they looked at and when they looked at it.
It's interesting that you should mention the sort of the e-discovery tools. Back I'll just say back in the day, there were situations where people would, you always had someone who wanted, the hot document, the interesting document sent to them. Send it to the partner, right? So if you can't do it within the tool, which in some instances was the case, most tools have that capability now. You'd have someone downloading that to a laptop, and now you have the most sensitive documents in a bucket, and also shared via email. So again, you're massively increasing your risk associated with that some of the most sensitive information by not contemplating sharing in a sensible way. Not to mention just the fact that it was also incredibly cumbersome to share in that way.
Yeah, that's I think maybe executive stock options are a frequent things that are emailed around.
Yes. So we need to pick up the pace a little bit, because I know you have. I want to make sure we give you enough time to talk cloud capabilities. This is sort of. I think there's a lot of buzz around this. Everyone's talking about the cloud. It's just basically someone else's server, but in the mysterious cloud. So, organizations taking cloud-first strategies. Some of this is, of course, connected with infrastructure and costs. And I think, in some instances, some of these cloud providers, server providers and so on can allow security and redundancy and information in a way that is better than what some smaller organizations for sure can provide themselves. But with GDPR, there are additional considerations, right, BJ?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think in some cases, when you think about things like GDPR, that actually may an organization that maybe wasn't thinking about the cloud actually shifts in that direction, right? Because you have to think about data localization, something that you may have not dealt with before. And certainly, if I've got 10 or 15 folks working in the UK, that doesn't mean that it's going to make sense for me to spin up some of my own infrastructure there. It's it's just going to be more efficient, more secure, and faster to utilize a cloud infrastructure for that.
And then you can also have, I think, better insight and control over that, better visibility into it if you're doing it through, say, one of the big cloud providers versus Bob's house of servers over in the UK. So,
yes.
Anyway, just a last bit on here, automation. So, the value proposition that we're talking of aligning IG with the business is to make it easier for the business to reduce the burden. And automation, certainly where we can do this, anytime we can avoid a manual step, we avoid those kinds of inefficiencies and the burden, the Sisyphean feeling of IG. It doesn't have to be like that. And it also, of course, improves findability later. It reduces risks because we're taking some of those manual steps out of the human hands. And again, we're also taking them out of people who, the hands of people who are not necessarily focused on the use of information in that way. So they're focused on their day-to-day. It's not their day-to-day priority. And this is a way also when we automate, we can make sure some of this stuff actually gets done and done well. BJ, any comments on that before I think we'll switch over to you shortly. So.
Yeah, no, I think I want to watch the clock here, so yeah. I'll dig into that a little bit when we move on. But yeah, every executive wants to get the most out of their employees, and they don't want them doing administrivia, my favorite new word. So there's a lot of reasons why automation is really important.
So I think at this point, let's. So I did want to talk to you about a little bit just quickly of how your intake process begins. So you show up at your client and you're trying to help them align their business processes with their IG needs. What do you ask them? Where do you start with them in this process?
Well, yeah, I think for us, because we're sort of coming at this from a document centric viewpoint. We really need to understand where are all the places that documents are originating, right? It's rare that there isn't paper in the mix somewhere, and people always kind of sound them. I know we're behind the times. We still have paper. I'm like, no, everybody says the exact same thing. Don't feel bad. So what's your current state in terms of where that information's coming from, and then what are you trying to get to? What's the problem that you're trying to solve, right? It's not going to be because you have a green initiative. You're not going to get budget for that, right? It sounds great, but you're probably not getting budget for it. What's the business issue you're trying to solve? And in some cases, is there an ROI? So we're really just trying to understand what the current state is and where they want to be, and just as important, why they want to be there.
That makes sense. So let's just, at this point, we just want to transition over to just a little bit, BJ, you're going to talk a little bit about Access and what Access does, and then we'll transition into the case study.
Okay, we can absolutely do that. Let me just so we don't have to make Nick constantly do this.
That's appreciated.
I know, Nick, you really wanted to do it. All right, so just a quick infomercial on Access, right? So we were founded in 2004. We've grown to be the largest privately held records and information managed provider globally. And super proud to have been on the, and to still be on the Inc. 5,000 list for 11 years in a row now. And so it was interesting. I always look at the ARMA information lifecycle. We sort of think about that lifecycle, in a similar way, right? So our goal at Access is to provide transformative technology services and expertise to make organizations more efficient and compliant by helping them manage and utilize their critical business information. So we really are thinking about the full life cycle, right? Any company like Access who is, sort of grew up as an information management company, compliance and security, it's kind of at the core of everything we do. But we're really starting to think a lot more about how we can help our clients be more efficient and how they need to utilize that information. So our global presence spans the US and Canada as well as Latin America. And these locations as well as our transportation fleet, what it allows us to do is maintain security even with that physical information through a continuous chain of custody for our customers. All right, so let's get into it about our client success story. Large international retailer in beauty products, and I don't go down those aisles too often. Paper-based processes and employee files and an increasingly complex regulatory environment, as well as the need to improve security, compliance, and efficiency, prompted this client of ours to start a search for an digital employee document management solution to support a lot of different business issues or resolve a bunch of business issues that they had. But if you think about all those locations, an extremely distributed workforce. So that was one of the big challenges for them. Now, before we dive into the solution, let's take a look at some of the things we were talking about earlier, which are sort of some common themes that we're seeing out there with the client. So back to that technology stacks or ecosystems that Ann and I were talking about earlier. So our client really did a good job of identifying some of those problems that they were trying to solve, which I said, as I said, we'll dig into. But equally important in their search was you had to fit into their ecosystem now and in the future because they knew they were going to change technologies. HR executives, they're just like any other, business leader, and that we see in other groups. They sort of understand that, particularly when you're in a large organization, it's tough to get it all done, with one system, right? And so the myth of one system that does it all has just been replaced with the reality of, best of breed technology ecosystems. And so here's that Gartner statistic that we were talking about earlier. So what Gartner said is about 30% of the global mid-market and large enterprises have invested in human capital management suites. And again, that's your Workdays and your ADPs and that stuff that's really got many components bundled into it. But even when they implement those sophisticated suites, there can be as much as 30% of the requirements that have to come from other solutions. So even investment in some of those best of breed suites just doesn't cut it. There's still other things that are needed. And then, if we look at acquisitions, regional legislation, like I said, I was just at HR Tech, there's a huge proliferation of new employee-facing applications. All of these things are sort of pushing more technology, into the HR field. And, it's while that investment in those HCM suites, it's going to continue. It's just kind of obvious after looking at all the cool technology that's out there that there's just going to continue to be other solutions that come into those ecosystems. And you see that outside of HR, right? So every analyst said that there's going to be an increased spend on cloud-based technology, but a lot of that is really behind the user experience is driving that. Really, it's back to that we want an app for everything, right? we want mobile-friendly solutions, but that doesn't mean that we can get rid of that, on-premise solution that's storing a lot of valuable information. What it means is that the system of record may be feeding the system of engagement, right? So every department has to align with their business goals. And so to better understand that in the HR space, we partnered with the HR Research Institute, surveyed about, it was between 300 and 400 business leaders, and asked them to select their top 4 critical business goals for this year. Really no big surprise, right? Efficiency, boosting, boost employee engagement, hit your sales target, improve customer satisfaction. Those things all kind of make sense. But as we go on, what we'll start to realize is that there's actually a relationship between number 1 and number 9 on this list, right? Every leader in every department, they want to get the most out of their team and have them devote their time to the things that bring the most value to the organization. Yet, with all the technology that we have, administrative tasks, they still occupy just way too much of our time, and HR really is no exception. The interesting thing in HR, though, is those administrative tasks are frequently connected to essential business practices, right? They have to do these administrative tasks are things that they have to do by law to protect their organization. And so, it's kind of competing demands. How do I, be efficient when I have these really critical administrative tasks that relate to compliance and security? And so when we think about administrative challenges, and again, this is in HR, but I think some of this could fit in almost any place in an organization, right? There's a mixture of paper and digital. Really tough to be efficient if you got paper in a business process. And like I said earlier, most of the companies we come across, there's a mixture of both, right? Just too many places to look for documents. Obviously, process automation is neat to cut down on some of these administrative tasks. Filing, responding to requests, even record keeping. How can we introduce some automation there? The wrong solution is definitely an efficiency killer, right? We come across a lot of clients that, hey, we went digital, we put it in this thing, and it really does nothing. But hey, it's digital, right? It was the wrong technology. It didn't fit the business problem, and that's why we always want to sort of, dig into that. Compliance, state privacy regulations, global, and then the state privacy regulations that are starting to be similar to GDPR, immigration laws, an increase in audits for HR with a shorter time period to respond. That's just boosting the administrative workload that we're seeing in our clients. And then security, right? HR, what we're seeing with some of our HR clients that don't have the right solutions in place, like they're really trying to do the right thing. But when you think about, there's HR, there's employees, there's managers, legal counsel, auditors, there's so many people that need secure, controlled access to employee documents. And obviously, downloading them and sending them via email, that is absolutely not the solution. And so the solution that we put in place for our national beauty retailer is we sort of set Carta HR in the middle of everything that they do, right? And so we took responsibility for all the record keeping, and so we integrate with their I-9 E-Verify solution. We integrate with their onboarding. We're receiving reference data from their HCM suite. We converted all their paper documents to digital, cleaned up their file shares, and so now there is one place where they can find everything. Added bonus for them is, again, big national retailer. Unemployment claims was a real beast for them. So we built a connectivity between the third-party company that does their unemployment claims. And so sort of the final solution is, the solution aligned with the business, right? Our Carta HR solution that we deployed for them, mobile friendly, easy to use. Obviously, like I said, we converted all the paper to digital. HR service delivery is a big thing these days in the HR world. And so we absolutely improved that for them, made their team more productive. That 15% productivity increase stat, that's something Gartner says that you can achieve when you move to the right employee document management solution. We see our clients are a little bit higher than that. But process savings is really where clients are seeing the return on their investment. We've got compliance monitors that provide proactive notification of missing or expired documents. So there's no more waiting and panicking during the audit. And of course, I said earlier, we've got file rooms to allow folks to respond to audits. And we start to automate retention based on a combination of document types and metadata coming out of that HRIS. And then, finally, security, right? If, to do it right is sometimes hard. And so, obviously we're going to be encrypting everything that we hold, single sign-on on almost every deployment, right? Nobody needs another password. We talked about that two-factor authentication for sharing. And then, we're connected to their HRS, so we can inherit security profiles that may already exist in another solution. And then we do things like, secure links for sharing, as well as those file rooms. That might be the fastest I've ever gone through those slides.
Sorry for not leaving you much time there. So
that's okay. It's my fault.
Do we have any time for a few questions? Do you have a minute or so?
I got a minute.
Okay, perfect. Let's turn to Q&A time. There are a bunch of questions that have come in through various channels here. A question I liked here from Eric: what's the best approach to retrofitting an entire existing ecosystem of applications that store document type content in order to add retention?
You want that one, Ann?
Sure. No. Well, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is take it one nibble at a time. So
yes.
The idea, you can't do that all at once. You'll fail. So I mean, I think what we're talking about here today is I think can be related to that too. Is there are some areas that are more amenable to that kind of retrofitting, and understand that they have a problem. So my suggestion would be pick a place to start with a business area that's willing to work with you in that and have a business success on that. So I mean, again, you're not going to get to the point where you can do the entire organization unless you have an unusual situation. It's a very small org. You won't be able to handle it all at once. You'll fail, and then it will be a failure story as opposed to a success. So the first thing I would do is to find the business area I want to focus on first.
Yeah, and if it ends up being a failure because you've taken on too much scope in this iteration, it'll be even harder to build the business case for the next time you want to approach the problem that would still exist. Question here from Maria: what's the difference between cloud content or cloud technology and ECM with regards to records?
So, I mean, it doesn't have to be a difference, right? You could, obviously you could be on-prem when you think about electronic records, but you could also be utilizing cloud technology or a combination of both, right? You could have an on-premise ECM and be using some sort of cloud technology to push retention into that solution through an API or some sort of integration. So it sort of goes back to, you got that ECM that's got terabytes and terabytes, not going anywhere. So, what other technology might you want to connect to that ECM solution to, to achieve what you want without making it such an onerous task?
Yeah, and we do have a few more questions in. If you've sent in a question and we haven't answered it here, we will answer your question after the fact. I want to thank BJ and Ann for today's webinar. Thank them for continuing to serve this community by sharing their knowledge. Our next webinar is going to be announced soon, so keep your eye on your email box. Before we close, I'd like to remind you to become a professional member of ARMA International. Take the time to invest in yourself. And while you're at it, if you haven't done it already, register for the ARMA conference in Nashville. It's coming up very soon. Hopefully we'll see most of you in Nashville. ARMA has an array of resources available for you. They are now easier to navigate in our new menu structure at arma.org. From our white papers to our training to our magazine to our research. In our magazine right now, there are an array of articles. You can access those at magazine.arma.org. On behalf of our speakers, the wonderful folks at Access, I want to thank you for who give of their time and their money to sponsor programming like this webinar today. And from all of us at ARMA International, I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Wish you the best in all of your information endeavors, and keep an eye on your email box for a white paper that is coming as a deep dive on this topic shortly. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great time in your information environment. Have a great day, folks.
All right, thanks everyone.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.